恭请大德圣听，为此法会及一切众生，请转妙法论，教导我们如何了生脱世离苦得乐，速证无生。Will the Sangha with great virtue, out of compassion for the sake of this assembly and all living beings, please turn the wonderful Dharma wheel to teach us how to leave suffering and attain bliss, and end birth and death, and quickly realize non-birth.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Namo sadanto sucheto ye alahati sanmiao sanbuddho che. 无上甚深微妙法，百千万劫难遭遇。我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。Supreme and wondrous Dharma, subtle and profound, rarely is encountered, even in a billion eons. But now we see and hear it and accept it reverently. May we truly understand the Buddha's actual meaning. Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Venerable Master, and all good knowing advisors, welcome back to, this is class number 56 of our exploration of the Dharma, using the Medicine Master Buddha Sutra as the vehicle to do that. We will begin by reciting Medicine Master Buddha's name 7 times. I'm going to invite everyone to join me in putting our palms together. Namo, quelling disasters, lengthening life, Medicine Master Buddha. 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 Medicine Master does come one, Medicine Master does come one, Medicine Master does come one, Medicine Master does come one. Okay, let's bring up the slide for today. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue with precepts. We've been exploring the concept of right view for the past few weeks, how having right view makes all the difference in our practice. So today, we will go to what is wrong view very briefly, but the whole session for today is actually on wrong view. And someone unusually will be concentrating on just one sutra. It's not the Medicine Master Buddha Sutra, but it's called the Payasi Sutta. The Payasi Sutta is a very, depending on your perspective, it can be humorous because it shows a very stubborn man whose name is Payasi. So he has the honor of the sutra being named after him. And how we have one of the Buddha's disciples very, very patiently trying to help him widen his mind, giving him some wisdom so that he, by developing right view, he doesn't fall. And we'll see how we do that. But before we get there, why are we doing this? Well, I've shared this before, so I'll briefly read this with everyone. This is from Bodhidharma and his views on right view and right intention. And this is what he has to say. It says, mortals who don't understand true practice and blindly perform good deeds are born in the three highest states of existence within the three realms. And what are these three highest states? It says, those who blindly perform the 10 good deeds and foolishly seek happiness are born as gods in the realm of desire. What are the 10 good deeds? 10 good deeds are no harming. So it's the 5 precepts, which is no harming or killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no slander or malicious speech. And then number 6 is offensive or harsh speech. Number 7 is frivolous chatter. That means you talk about the weather, you talk about the stock market, you talk about your neighbor, you talk about everything except the Dharma. That more or less, there's a very broad stroke, but that's frivolous prattle. You're just making small talk, but in a way that just gives people more false thinking. Okay, and then number 8 is covetousness. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but it's wanting things that you don't have, like a bit like jealousy, but more on, kind of like that. Number 9 is ill will, or like hatred. And number 10 is having wrong views. Okay, so Bodhidharma says if you do the 10 good deeds, sorry, what I just gave you just now was not the 10 good deeds, but the 10 bad deeds, the 10 unwholesome deeds. I'm so sorry. Okay, the harming, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, slander, harsh speech, frivolous speech, covetousness, ill will, and wrong views. Those are unwholesome deeds. Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, so Bodhidharma says those who blindly perform the 10 good deeds, which is the opposite of what I just gave you, and foolishly seek happiness are born as gods in the realm of desire. And he also says, second one, those who blindly observe the 5 precepts and foolishly indulge in love and hate are born as men in the realm of anger. And number 3, those who blindly cling to the phenomenal world, believe in false doctrines, and pray for blessings are born as demons in the realm of delusion. It says these are the 3 highest states of existence. So this is not what we want for ourselves, because these are still rebirth in the realm of samsara, and then you get reborn, and then you forget, and then you repeat everything all over again. And you still have no control over where you're going. So that's not what we want. So in order to recognize what are wrong views, or how to get, so we've been exploring what are proper views throughout this whole time. And sometimes it doesn't make the wrong views apparent. So what you see in front of you right now on your screen is a list of the 5 common wrong views. I've also shared this before in a bit of detail in past classes. So I will not explain this in full, because the Payasi Sutta that we have for today is pretty long, because it's not easy to overturn someone's wrong views. So the first wrong view is thinking that we have a soul, believing that there is a real person. What do we think is real? We think that we are real, as in we have a soul that goes from body to body. We think that the 5 skandhas are real. What are the 5 skandhas? Basically, it is the functions of our body, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body itself, and the mind, if we think that that's what makes us us, then that's a wrong view. And that's very hard to take for a lot of people because we don't know anything else. Our six senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, is the only way we can measure our existence or our reality for most of us. So for someone to say that if you think that way, that's a wrong view, it doesn't really give us a lot to, it's not very foundational. Then people, the next question is, then what is me? What is my, what makes me me? Because when I look in the mirror, when I'm observing my mind, I think that's me. So Shufu says that doing this is what he refers to as, he says, mistaking a thief for a robber for your son. Because we think it is real. We assume it is real because it's very easy to do so. No one will say that, no one will fault you, but it isn't correct. And the only way we can find that out is to bring our attention inwards into our mind, and instead of attaching or falling after our thoughts, we observe our thoughts. That's or in other words, meditation. So the good news is, when you become a first stage arhat or a stream enterer, you no longer have this wrong view. You are no longer confused by the fact that you are not your body and you are not your mind, this conscious mind that we are using, and you will never fall into the three lower realms again. There are multiple suttas where the Buddha explains that as a stream enterer, you already qualify as a sage and you will never fall. And further good news is that to become a stream enterer is well within the how you say, the becoming a stream enterer is very common for lay people. Let's put it that way. In the Buddha Sutras, there are so many stories about lay people going right up to third stage arhat, not even just the first stage, but up to third stage. So it's a very attainable process. So that's the good news. Okay. Number two, extreme views. Extreme views is thinking that most of the time it talks about nihilism. What's nihilism? Nihilism is that people thinking that after you die, there's nothing left. There's just darkness, I guess, that we are just temporary. So I think that when you die, everything's over. There's no more rebirth. The converse of that is thinking that there's a God responsible for everything, meaning there's no karma, there's no cause and effect, but there's someone controlling everything that happens to you. Let me see what else that is number two. Yeah, just basically thinking that there's a permanent soul is connected to number one, that keep on going and going, or the opposite, which is when you die, there's nothing left. So it's either nihilism or eternalism. And part of that is thinking that in your next life, you are going to be still you, meaning that, like for example, if I think that in my next life, I will still have my memories, I will still be JinHe, the same face, the same personality, I'm going to be in for a huge surprise or disappointment. Yeah. Number three, false views is specifically not believing in cause and effect, thinking that things happen for no reason or by will of God, or everything is fated, and thereby you are not responsible for your actions or for your future. There is no past or future rebirth. All your actions have no effects, and then you because of this, you engage in all forms of unwholesome deeds, That would be number 3. Do we have any questions? Okay. All right. If not, then you can keep your mics muted. Right. Number 4, rigid attachment to views, meaning you're stubborn. You think that you are right in your view, although you may not have any evidence, or your evidence is very shaky. But because you are very stubborn and you don't have an open mind, no one can convince you that you're wrong or can bring you to the right path. Okay. And then number 5 is rigid attachment to the efficacy of rites and rituals. This is thinking that, say, if you sacrifice an animal, you will get good luck. Thinking that if you sing very well in the ceremony, if you come to the temple, you sing very well, and you do everything right, like how you stand, how you put up your palms, that will transform you and end your rebirth. So thinking that doing something, a ritual, is enough to end birth and death, to end the cycle of suffering, that would be a wrong view. So rigid attachment to rites and rituals. And there are a lot of stories. I've shared a story before about, maybe I haven't shared this story. The emperor who buried the Diamond Sutra under the steps. Have I shared that story before? If not, I'm sure there will be a lot of opportunities in the future to share that. Okay, maybe someone can remind me in the chat box if I've shared that story before. Okay, so now that we have an idea of what the wrong views are, let's look at the Payasi Sutta and see how many wrong views you can spot in this person called Payasi. Who is Payasi? Well, Payasi was a chieftain. That means kind of like a mayor in modern terms. He was probably the chief of a village or like a district area, and the place is called Setavia. And it was a how you say, crown property. It was the property belonged to the king, and it was given to the chieftain by King Pasenadi of Kosala. So it was a very prosperous place. It says it's teeming with living creatures, full of hay, wood, water, and grain, a royal endowment, a royal gift of the highest quality. So this Chief Pasai wasn't like some ordinary chief. He was regarded pretty highly. So I'll just read. It says, now at that time, Payasi had the following harmful misconception. It says, there's no afterlife, no beings are reborn spontaneously, there's no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. So this is what he thinks, which is, if you look at the world, this is what most people think. And the Payasi Sutta is very interesting because as I was growing up, you definitely see, if you are a practicing Buddhist, you would definitely know many Payasis in your life, people who share the same views as Payasi. So during this time, how this sutra started is that the whole village found out that one of the, that Mahakashyapa, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, was in the area. So they all got very excited and they wanted to go and receive, to greet Mahakashyapa, Venerable Kashyapa, and to obtain teachings. So when Payasi found this out, he told his one of his messengers or one of his servants, he said, go to the Brahmins and householders and say to them, sirs, the chieftain Payasi asks you to wait, as he will also go to see the ascetic Kashyapa, the prince. Venerable Kashyapa is called the prince here, not because he's an actual prince, but because he's a monk of the Buddha, so he's a prince. So before Venerable Kashyapa, the prince convinces those foolish and incompetent Brahmins and householders that there's an afterlife, there are beings reborn spontaneously, and there's a fruit or result of good and bad deeds, for none of these things are true. So he thinks that by going with his villagers, he will protect them from false views. Yeah. So they go, they see Venerable Kashyapa, and then he straight away, the chief, after paying his respects or his greetings, he says, Master Kashyapa, this is my doctrine and view. There's no afterlife, no beings are reborn spontaneously, there's no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. And it's not wrong for him to say that, because it's very hard to see the results of cause and effect. For example, afterlife, how do you convince someone that when you die, you are reborn? That's number one. How do you show proof? And then there's no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. How do you convince someone that if you do something unwholesome, that you will get an unwholesome action consequence in return? So, these are how you say, it's almost a question of blind faith, as in you just believe, because how do you prove otherwise? Okay. So Master Kashyapa, Venerable Kashyapa replies, well, chieftain, I've never seen or heard of anyone holding such a doctrine or view. For how on earth can anyone say such a thing? Says, well then, chieftain, I'll ask you about this in return, and you can answer as you like. What do you think, chieftain, are the moon and sun in this world or the other world? Are they gods or humans? So now begins Venerable Kashyapa trying his compassionate best to make sure that Payasi, the chieftain, does not, how you say it, stick to his wrong views, because from wrong views come wrong results, unwholesome results. Okay. So Payasi replies, says, they are in the other world, Master Kashyapa, and they are gods, not humans. Okay, so this is what he says. So it says, so the reply is, by this method, it ought to be proven that there is an afterlife, that there are beings born spontaneously, and there's a fruit or result of good and bad deeds. And then, but he remains stubborn. He says, even though Master Kashyapa says this, still I think there's no afterlife, no beings are reborn spontaneously, and there's no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. So this isn't a convincing argument, and you can't really blame him. Then Venerable Kashyapa asks him back, is there a method by which you can prove what you say? What proof do you have? So he says, okay, well, I have friends and colleagues, relatives and kin who kill living creatures, steal, and commit sexual misconduct. They use speech that's false, divisive, harsh, or nonsensical. And they're covetous, malicious, with wrong view. Sometime later, they become sick, suffering, gravely ill. Does this list sound familiar? He's just listed down the 10 unwholesome deeds. So he says he knows people who do all these things. And when he knows that they're going to die, either through illness or through old age, he says, when I know that they will not recover from illness only. He says, when I know they will not recover from the illness, I go to them and say, okay, he's very crafty. He says, sirs, there are some ascetics and Brahmins who have this doctrine and view. Those who kill living creatures, steal, and commit sexual misconduct, use speech that's false, divisive, harsh or nonsensical, and are covetous, malicious, and have wrong view, when their body breaks up after death, are reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. You do all these things. If what those ascetics and Brahmins say is true, when your body breaks up after death, you'll be reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. I think, this Payasi is a very, what's the word for it? There's a word for someone who, when you say the wrong thing at the wrong time, yeah, I know the word, I just don't know how to say it. I mean, I know there's a word for it, but I can't recall the word right now. I mean, this is the last thing. If you're dying and someone comes to tell you all these things without good news, skillful Skillful is one word for it, but it's not the word I'm looking for. So he goes on to say, if that happens, sir, come and tell me that there is an afterlife, there are beings reborn spontaneously, and there is a fruit or result of good and bad deeds. I trust you and believe you. Anything you see will be just as if I've seen it for myself. And they agree to this. Instead of scolding him, they actually agree. And he says, but they don't come back to tell me, nor do they send a messenger. Says, this is the method by which I prove that there's no afterlife, no beings are reborn spontaneously, and there's no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. So this is how he uses, and you can see from here that Payasi has actually investigated this. It's not that he just rests in a wrong view, but he knows what people say, he knows what he thinks, and he tries to find proof. He just doesn't accept his own mind. He actually tries to find proof. Okay. So now is Venerable Kasyapa's reply. He said, well then, chieftain, I'll ask you about this in return and you can answer as you like. What do you think, chieftain? Suppose they were to arrest a bandit, criminal, etc., and tell him, punish him as you will, then you would say to them, because he's the chieftain, so Venerable Kasyapa is using him as an example. He says, well then, my man, tie this man's arms tightly behind his back with a strong rope, shave his head, parade him in the street, take him out to the south gate, and there you execute him by chopping off his head. And then saying good, meaning the executioners, they will do as they told. And then now Venerable Kasyapa asked Payasi, he says, could that bandit get the executioners to wait, saying, please, good executioners, I have friends and colleagues, relatives and kin in such and such a village or town. Wait until I visited them, then I'll come back. Or would they just chop off his head as he prattled on? And Payasi's reply is, they just chop off his head. And someone is at that stage, you're already guilty, you lose, all your rights. You don't have the ability to demand for other things. People stop listening to you. So Venerable Kasyapa tries to reason. He says, so even a human bandit couldn't get his human executioners to stay his execution. What then of your friends and colleagues, relatives and kin who are reborn in a lower realm after doing bad things? And that's very reasonable. Because could they get the wardens of hell to wait, saying, please, good wardens of hell, wait until I've gone to the chieftain Payasi to tell him that there's an afterlife, and report back to say that you are right or you're wrong. And it says, by this method, it ought to be proven that there's an afterlife, that there are beings born spontaneously. And Payasi's reply to this is, says, even though you say all this, I still think there's no afterlife. Still very stubborn. So again, Venerable Kasyapa asks him, he says, is there a method by which you can prove what you say? Do you have more proof to back up your view? And he says, yes, he has one. So what method does he have? He says, well, I have friends and colleagues, relatives and kin who refrain from killing living creatures, stealing, and committing sexual misconduct. They refrain from speech that's false, divisive, harsh, or nonsensical. And they are content, kind-hearted with right view. Sometime later, they become sick, suffering, gravely ill. So now he changes tactic. Previously, it was people who did all the 10 unwholesome deeds. Now he says he has friends who are the opposite, who are really good people, and then they fall ill. So he repeats the same thing. He says when he knows that they are going to die from the illness, he goes to them and he tells them this is the same pattern. He says that it is said that when people who live the same life as you all have, when they die, they are reborn in where? He says, in a good place, in a heavenly realm. He says, you do all these things. If what these people, the ascetics and Brahmins say is true, you'll be reborn in a good place, a heavenly realm. So he says, if that happens, come back. Say, come and tell me that there's an afterlife. I trust you and believe you. Anything you see will be just as if I've seen it for myself. And they agree to this, but they don't come back to tell me. He tells Venerable Kasyapa, says they don't. not only they don't come back, but they don't send a messenger, and this is the so this is my proof, my method that there's no afterlife. Okay. Let me advance the slide, and there's a question that we have that might be related. I'm not sure. Let me read it first. Oh, okay. Okay. So Ruchang has a question. He said, I have a question about Buddhist heavens. I'm confused about the 33 heavens within the three realms, or is it one heaven that has 33 levels, or they have total of 33 heavens and the 8 levels of samadhi? Okay. There's a specific heaven called the heaven of the 33. Okay. And the three realms refer to the realms of humans, hungry ghosts, and hells. And the 8 levels of samadhi do correspond in a way. For example, if you are in one of the dhyanas and you pass away, yes, you can get reborn in a corresponding heaven, but that would be the formless heavens, not the form or desire-based heavens. Yeah. So you are mixing up a lot of things, Ruchang. They are somewhat related, but they are also distinct in themselves. Okay. Coming back to Payasi. So now Venerable Kashyapa gives him a counter argument, and he explains more. He says, I shall give you a simile. What's a simile? A simile is what he's been doing, is giving a metaphor. Why? He says, by means of a simile, some sensible people understand the meaning of what is said. So a simile contains principle. It may not, how you say, from a simile, you find what the principle is. And then from the principle, you can apply it to different situations. So that's what a simile is for. Conversely, some people who are too smart try to find fault with the simile itself instead of trying to figure out the principle behind the simile. So that's wrong. So he says sensible people understand the meaning of what is said by means of a simile. So what is his metaphor? He says, suppose there were a man sunk over his head in the sewer. Then you were to order someone to pull him out of the sewer and they'll agree to do so. Then you tell them to carefully scrape the dung off the man's body with bamboo scrapers. You tell them to carefully scrub the man's body down with pale clay 3 times. Then you tell them to smear the man's body with oil and carefully wash him down with fine paste 3 times. What are these? This is how people used to clean themselves before soap was invented. So you like even in ancient Greece, in Rome, you clean yourselves by rubbing olive oil on the body, then that would soften the skin, and then you would use a scraper to scrape off all the dead skin cells, and then you would be left with clean skin. So over here, they don't just do that. After they scrape it off, they use pale clay, which is, I guess, kind of a bit like sand, but not so abrasive, to scrub yourself clean, and then smear the man's body with oil and carefully wash him down with fine paste. So fine paste is also an abrasive thing, and usually I think they also have incense, powder incense combined with fine paste as a fine paste, or they do that after, I'm not sure. But basically, it's just saying that you take someone from a very dirty condition and you clean him really, really well. And not just clean him really well, but he smells good after that. And not only that, says then you tell them to dress that man's hair and beard, give him clothes, adorn him well with costly garlands. And at the end of it all, says you bring that man up to the stilt longhouse. Okay, what I didn't mention was that Payasi's palace, or his chieftain residence, is a longhouse built on stilts, just like how we have in some parts of the world. So meaning you bring him to a fine place and set him up with a fine kinds of sensual stimulation, good food, drink, music, and entertainment, and so on. So he asked the chieftain, Mahakasyapa asked the chieftain, now that the man is nicely bathed, anointed, dressed well, etc., would he want to dive back in the sewer again? Okay. And Payasi says, no, Master Kasyapa. Why is that? Because that sewer is filthy, stinking, disgusting, and repulsive, and is regarded as such. Everyone knows that. So Venerable Kasyapa says, in the same way, chieftain, to the gods, human beings are filthy. We stink, we are disgusting, we are repulsive, and are regarded as such. It's true. Human beings, you don't shower or you don't clean yourself after, some people 1 day, some people 3-4 days, you start to smell. And how you say, we have so many orifices in the body that we constantly have to clean. So human beings are actually not very clean animals. We take a lot of effort to try to just not to smell, not to be dirty, and to look good. So Mahakasyapa says, what then of your friends and colleagues who are reborn in a higher realm? Will they come back to tell you that there's an afterlife? So by this method too, it ought to be proven that there is an afterlife. So it tries to convince Payasi this way. And Payasi is still stubborn and says that he is not convinced. And then Venerable Kasyapa, with his infinite patience and compassion, again asks Payasi, do you have more proof? And he says, yes. Okay, so now let's look at Payasi's counter argument. He says, well, I have friends and colleagues who refrain from killing living creatures and so on. And then same pattern, when they're going to die, he says, sir, there are some ascetics and Brahmins who have this doctrine and view. Those who refrain from killing living creatures and so on are reborn in a good place, a heavenly realm, in the company of the gods of the 33. So now he's referring to a specific heaven, which is the heaven of 33. Heaven of the 33 is said to be, I think it's the second heaven closest to us, closest, not, I don't think it's by distance, but by, I don't know what measure to use, by virtue or by attainment. The closest one is the realm of the heavenly, what's the proper name? The heaven of the 4 gods, 4 heavenly kings, and then after that is 33. So he says, if you're reborn, he tells his friends, if you're reborn in the company of the gods of the 33, come back to tell me. So he's becoming more specific, Payasi. And then he tells Venerable Kasyapa, he says, but they don't come back to tell me, nor do they send a messenger. This is how I prove that there's no afterlife. So Venerable Kasyapa says, he says, well, I ask you about this in return. Says 100 human years are equivalent to 1 day and 1 night for the gods of the 33. 30 such days make a month, and 12 months make a year. The gods of the 33 have a lifespan of 1,000 years. Now, as to your friends who are reborn in the company of the gods of the 33 after doing good things, if they think, first I amuse myself for 2 or 3 days, supplied and provided with the 5 kinds of heavenly sensual stimulation. Then I'll go back to Payasi and tell him that there's an afterlife. Would they come back to tell you that there's an afterlife? And that's very reasonable. If you go to a new place, like if you go on vacation, you need to check in the hotel, or you want to walk around the hotel. Maybe you're hungry, you want to have a meal, and go be lazy by the pool, and then you make a phone call back to your mother or to your children or to whoever it is, or you send an email. That's pretty reasonable. So Payasi's reply is logical. It says, no, Master Kasyapa, for I would be long dead by then. Say, but Master Kasyapa, who has told you that the gods of the 33 exist, or that they have such a long lifespan? I don't believe you. So now he's throwing the ball back into Venerable Kasyapa's court, saying, you now have to prove to me that there's a heaven of the 33, because your word is as good as mine. Just because you say that it exists, what proof do you have? Why should I believe you? Okay, so it's challenging Venerable Kasyapa. So this is Venerable Kasyapa. He says, Chieftain, suppose there was a person blind for birth. They can't see colors, dark or light, dark or bright, blue, yellow, red. They can't see even, uneven ground or the stars or the moon and sun. And they would say there's no such thing as dark or bright sides, and no one sees them. There's no such thing as blue, yellow, red. Why? Because I don't know it or see it, therefore it doesn't exist. And then he asked Payasi, he says, would they be speaking rightly? If a blind person were to say this, would it be right for them to make such a claim? Payasi says, no, Master Kasyapa, there are such things as dark, bright sides. And why he says that? Because Payasi has sight, he can see. So he says, so it's not right to say this, I don't know it or see it, therefore it doesn't exist. So Mahakasyapa says, in the same way, Chieftain, when you tell me you don't believe me, you seem like the blind man in the simile. You can't see the other world the way you think, with the eye of the flesh. Says, there are ascetics and Brahmins who live in the wilderness, frequenting remote lodgings in the wilderness and the forest. Meditating diligently, keen and resolute, they purify the divine eye, the power of clairvoyance. Am I saying that right? Clairvoyance. With clairvoyance that is purified and superhuman, that they see this world and the other world and sentient beings who are spontaneously reborn. That's how to see the other world, not how you think with the eye of the flesh. By this method too, it ought to be proven that there is an afterlife. So I guess if you come from India and during that time, because even before the Buddha's time, there were already people who were meditating, and they already had religions based on people who through their meditations could recall their past lives from the heavenly realm. So it was the divine eye or the heavenly eye, how you say, wasn't new. People knew about it. And guess what Payasi says? 10 points to the person who can guess. Still, he's very stubborn. He says, I still think that there's no afterlife. And he has further proof, because when asked, he says, I have more proof. Okay. What proof does he have? He says, I see ascetics and Brahmins who are ethical, of good character, who want to live and don't want to die, who want to be happy and recoil from pain. I think to myself, if those ascetics and Brahmins knew that things were going to be better for them after death, they would drink poison, slit their wrists, hang themselves, or throw themselves off a cliff. They must not know that things are going to be better for them after death. That's why they are ethical, of good character, wanting to live and not wanting to die, wanting to be happy and recoiling from pain. This is the method by which I prove that there's no afterlife. And this is pretty good logic, right? Because if you are a true Brahmin and or ascetic, and you do know that you have seen for yourself that there is a better place that you go to after you die, and you know that the way you have lived your life will bring you to rebirth in a place like that, why would you continue here, right? Wouldn't you want to go as soon as you can, right? If there's a holiday, a vacation that you've wanted for a long time, and would you wait a longer time to go on vacation, or will you want to go as soon as you can? That's pretty ironclad logic. So ever patient and ever compassionate Brahma Mahashakapa replies, well then, chieftain, I shall give you a simile, another simile. He says, for by means of a simile, some sensible people understand the meaning of what is said. Hopefully he gets through this time. He says, once upon a time, a certain Brahmin had two wives. One had a son 10 or 12 years of age, while the other was pregnant and about to give birth. Then the Brahmin passed away. So the youth said to the mother's co-wife, the second wife, he said, Madam, all the wealth, grain, Silver and gold is mine and you get nothing. Transfer to me my father's inheritance. This is a very common story. And then says, but the Brahmin lady says, the second wife says, wait, my dear, until I give birth. If it's a boy, one portion shall be his. If it's a girl, she will be your reward. Okay, I don't know what that means, she will be your reward, but okay, let's just continue reading. It says, but for a second time and a third time, the youth insisted that the entire inheritance must be his. So the Brahmin lady took a knife, went to her bedroom and sliced open her belly, thinking, until I give birth, whether it's a boy or girl. She destroyed her own life and that of the fetus, as well as any wealth. So any chances of her getting the wealth, either 50-50 if she gives birth to a son, or I think both ways she wins, because she says if it's a girl, she will be your reward. And then as a second wife, her place in the household will still be somewhat guaranteed, I guess. So because she can't wait, so Mahakashyapa says, being foolish and incompetent, she sought an inheritance irrationally and fell to ruin and disaster. In the same way, chieftain, being foolish and incompetent, you are seeking the other world irrationally and will fall to ruin and disaster, just like that Brahmin lady. So we can see Venerable Kashyapa is now more not pleading, but more convincing him harder. It says, good ascetics and Brahmins don't force what is unripe to ripen, rather they wait for it to ripen. For the life of clever ascetics and Brahmins is beneficial. So long as they remain, good ascetics and Brahmins make much merit and act for the welfare and happiness of the people, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of gods and humans. By this method too, it ought to be proven that there is an afterlife. So there's a good reason. One is you can't force conditions, just like the durian fruit. If you pluck it before it's ready to fall by itself, you're not going to have a nice experience eating the fruit. You have to allow it to mature, ripen by itself, and when it falls, then you can eat. So the durian fruit is my simile. Okay, Mahakashyapa has many similes. I'm using the metaphor of a durian fruit. But Venerable Kashyapa also says that, but there's also a good reason why they stay, because it's for the welfare and benefit for gods and humans. So there's two good reasons why they don't end their life early. And guess what Payasi has to say about this? Same thing. He's still stubborn. So he's still holding on to his wrong views. And when asked if there's more justification, he said, yes, I have more reasons to think the way I do. So what is his long list of reasons? Okay, for this one, he says, suppose they were to arrest a bandit, a criminal, and present him. Okay, I need to take a quick break, and I will let you all read this on your own. Okay, and then I'll come back. Sorry, excuse me. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the interruption. So now Payasi goes through a different tactic, and he tries to look for evidence of a man's soul. And this is pretty, how you say, even up to now, I have known of Buddhists who they look at photographs of people who are dying or something, and they say, oh, they see some kind of light, and that's evidence that the consciousness is leaving the body. You know, they say things like that. So what Payasi has to say here is a very common perception idea, you know. And Tan says that that's terrible. Yes, well, but you know, Payasi as the chief of a village has a lot of responsibilities, and I guess overlooking the punishment of people who deserve it or who are guilty is one of them. So this is what he does. You know, he he looks for, through a very gruesome way, evidence of a soul escaping. But he doesn't see a soul escaping. Okay. So I'm not sure what's going on through Venerable Kasyapa's mind, but he says, well then, chieftain, I ask you about this in return, and you can answer as you like. He says, do you recall ever having a midday nap and seeing delightful parks, woods, meadows, and lotus ponds in a dream? Payasi says, I do. He says, at that time, were you guarded by hunchbacks, dwarfs, midgets, and younglings? He says, I was. I'm not sure the context for this sentence, but were you guarded? I guess Payasi as a chieftain has bodyguards. Maybe at that time, people who are hunchbacks, dwarfs, midgets, or maybe his servants, I guess, maybe servants were next to him. He says, but did they see your soul entering or leaving? So when you sleep and your consciousness, through a dream, is implied, goes to a different place. Do they see that happening? He says, no, they did not. So Venerable Kasyapa says, so if they couldn't even see your soul entering or leaving while you were still alive, how could you see the soul of a dead man? By this method too, it ought to be proven that there's no afterlife, there are beings born spontaneously, and there's a fruit or result of good and bad deeds. Again, Payasi is stubborn as ever. He says, even though you say all this, I still think there's no afterlife. When asked for more proof, he says, yes, I have more proof. He says, again, his proof is that they arrest someone, and then this poor guy, after being arrested and found guilty, is strangled with a bowstring. A bowstring is a string that's used for bow and arrow. So, and when he's dead, weigh him. So they weigh him before he dies, and they weigh him after he's dead. And Payasi says, he says, so long as they are alive, they are lighter, softer, more flexible. But when they die, they become heavier, stiffer, less flexible. This is how I prove that there's no afterlife. So I'm not sure about this. A dead body can become stiffer and harder, but heavier, I don't know. But anyway, this is what the sutta says. And Venerable Kasyapa says, well then, chieftain, I shall give you a simile. For by means of a simile, some sensible, people understand the meaning. He says, suppose a person was to heat an iron ball all day until it was burning, blazing, and glowing, and then they weighed with scales. After some time, when it had cooled and become extinguished, they weighed again. When would that iron ball be lighter, softer, and more workable? When it's burning or when it's cool? So Payasi says, so long as the iron ball is full of heat and air, burning, blazing, and glowing, it is lighter, softer, and more workable. But when it's cool, it becomes heavier, stiffer, and less workable. So Venerable Kasyapa is using the logic of physics, I guess. Says, so in the same way, so long as this body is full of life and warmth, and consciousness is lighter, softer, and more flexible. But when it lacks life and warmth, and consciousness is heavier, stiffer, and less flexible. By this method too, it ought to be proven that there is an afterlife. So Payasi's logic is that if the consciousness leaves the body, when you are dead, you should be lighter than when you're alive, because the body has, I guess, one less thing. And he's still not convinced. All right, Payasi is still not convinced. And he has more proof, because when asked, he has more proof. He says, again, a criminal. And then he says, but now it's different. Now the punishment is to take this man's life without injuring his outer skin, inner skin, flesh, sinews, bones, or marrow. Hopefully, we'll see his soul escaping. They agree and do what Payasi asks. He says, when he's half dead, I'll tell them to lay him on his back in hope of seeing his soul escape. They do so, but we don't see his soul escaping. I'll tell them to lay him bent over, to lay him on his side, to lay him on the other side, stand him upright, stand him upside down, strike him with fists, etc., etc., and to give him a good shaking in hope of seeing his soul escape. They do all these things, but we don't see his soul escaping. He goes on to say that for the poor guy who's been tortured to death, says for him the eye itself is present, and so are those sights. Yet he does not experience that sense feel. the ear itself is present, and so are the sounds. Then he lists down all the faculties. He says, the body itself is present, and so are those touches, yet he does not experience a sense field. This is how I prove that there's no afterlife, because the poor guy has been tortured until he's unconscious. Poor Venerable Kasyapa, after having to listen to this, says, I shall give you another simile. He says, once upon a time, a certain hornblower took his horn and traveled to a borderland, and he went to a certain village, and there he sounded his horn. And then he put the horn on the ground. He says, then the people came out and said, what's making this sound? You know, it's probably a sound that they never heard before. And so they gather around the hornblower and ask what's making the sound. And he explains that it's the horn that's making the sound. Then he says that then the villagers start manipulating the horn and ask the horn to make a sound, because, you know, they don't know. This is the first time they've ever encountered a horn. And no matter what they say, no matter how they position the horn, of course, the horn is not going to make a sound. So the hornblower thought, you know, how foolish are these borderland folk? I guess the word borderland folk means that they are at the fringes of the country, and so they are more uncultured. Says, how can they seek the sound of a horn so irrationally? And so what he does is he picks it up, he blows through it, makes 3 sounds, and then he left. Then the people of the borderland thought, so it seems when what is called a horn is accompanied by a person, accompanied by effort, and accompanied by wind, it makes a sound. But when these things are absent, it makes no sound. So this is Venerable Kasyapa's counter-argument. It says, in the same way, so long as this body is full of life and warmth and consciousness, it walks back and forth, stands, sits, and lies down. You can see, you can hear, you can smell, and all those things. But when it lacks life and warmth and consciousness, it does none of those things. By this method too, it ought to be proven that there's an afterlife. So it says, in other words, he's saying, Payasi, when you beat someone half to death, you know, and they're unconscious, of course, they're not going to be aware of all these things. Again, Payasi is being really stubborn. And this is a pretty long sutra, and I just realized we are out of time. Yeah. And because in the end, it's worth it, this sutta. There's a lot more to this sutta. But Payasi is an example of someone who not only has wrong views, he also has a specific kind of wrong view, which is an attachment to his wrong view. He's not being open-minded. And you can see the consequences of that is that when he's confronted with examples, it may not, maybe from our point of view, it may not be really convincing examples, but someone who understands, how you say, or someone who's interested enough in their own well-being, who is interested in wisdom and in improving themselves, will take it upon themselves to investigate more into when an example is given. So an example by itself, a simile or metaphor by itself may not be entirely convincing, but it's up to the listener to investigate further about the principles and use those principles to examine our own thinking. That would be what a wise person would do. Yeah, but Payasi is obviously not doing that right now. So we have run out of time. Next week, we'll continue with the Payasi Sutta, which is good for me because my homework is already done. And let me look at some of the questions. Okay, Ruchang has another. Okay, so Carrie says the way. Yes, Carrie, that cleaning is definitely an ancient practice of cleaning before soap was invented. I'm pretty sure soap was invented then, but not everyone maybe had access to soap. because you need animal fat. Ruchan says, I'm confused about the 4 heavenly kings. Jin for sure talked about it on Thursday. Are the 4 heavenly kings in one heaven, or are they king of 4 different heavens, or are they lords under the first heaven? By the first heaven in rule. Okay. Okay, Ruchang. 4 heavenly kings heaven is one heaven. That heaven has the 4 heavenly kings. But that heaven has 4 sections, I guess. And so it's one heaven with 4 kings, just like one earth has different continents, something like that. Okay. Number 2, about what we refer to as the Jade Emperor or the Christian God, that would be the heaven of the 33, and that is where Lord Indra or Chakra, or in Hokkien we call it Ti Kong. That's the heaven of the 33. Okay, Rucha, I'm going to email you a book that is going to answer all your questions, but it's a very thick book, so you have to take your time to read, but it will answer any questions that you have about not just the heavenly realms, but everything that you need to know about the heavenly realms and the dhyanas to get to which heavenly realm. If you have mastered the dhyanas or you want to know more, I'll send you the book. And Tan says this Q&A made me think of the Shurangama Sutra on where to find the true nature. Yes, the Payasi Sutta is very much like the Shurangama Sutra in the way like how the Buddha patiently guides Venerable Ananda to the true mind. Venerable Kashyapa here is trying his best to bring Payasi away from wrong views, because we shall see the result of his wrong views at the end of the sutra. It's very interesting. Yeah, because he says there's no proof, right, for someone who he tries to find proof, people going to the hells or people going to heaven, and they don't send back any word. But in the end, Payasi actually manages to send back word about where he has gone. And this is why it's such an interesting sutra. So we have to wait for next week so this week and next week is slightly different. This sutta is more like a story, and I hope all of you had fun as I did in sharing Payasi's experience. Do you have any more questions for today? Or anyone with anything to share? You can unmute your mic.
Dharma Master, I think it's so interesting. Yeah, I think we learn a lot from this question answer, and also it shows how much patient is the venerable Kashyapa is in finding ways, to guide, etc. So I learn a lot from this.
Yeah, and this is just halfway through. There's still more.
Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait. Amitabha. Thank you so much, Dharma Master, for bringing this sutra.
Okay, so anyone else? Any questions? If not, let me end this slideshow, and we can dedicate merit. Okay. All right, I'm going to invite everyone to join me in putting our palms together. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Before everyone goes, let's bow. So I don't forget. Bow to the Buddhas first. Okay, 3 bows. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. Half bow. Bowing respect to the Venerable Master. Second bow. Third bow. Half bow.